I regret now that I put an innocent man through that.
I didn't want it on my conscience that I'd put somebody in prison based on lies.
The police investigation and the whole judicial system, I mean, you've accomplished nothing, and you've actually damaged this innocent person, and you've got a killer still out there.
In November 2001, Columbia, Missouri was rocked by the brutal murder of a sports editor who was found beaten and strangled in the parking lot of his workplace. The case, with scant forensic evidence and no leads, quickly went cold. 2 years later, a teenager's shocking confession reopened the investigation, implicating both himself and a friend. Both were subsequently imprisoned for murder, but questions lingered. Had justice truly been served, or had a grave miscarriage of justice taken place? This is the case of Ryan Ferguson, a chilling example of what happens when a prosecutor is willing to do anything to secure a conviction, no matter the cost. Let's rewind to Halloween night, October 31st, 2001. For 17-year-old high school junior Ryan Ferguson, the night promised excitement as he headed to a friend's party in Columbia, Missouri. But upon arrival, the party was abruptly shut down by the police due to noise complaints. A disappointing start for Ferguson, who wasn't ready to call it a night. As luck would have it, Ferguson spotted his childhood friend, 17-year-old Charles Erickson, known as Chuck. Eager to salvage the evening, Ferguson suggested they meet up with his older sister, who was at a club downtown. She had something that could turn their luck around: fake IDs, the golden tickets for underage fun. With IDs in hand, Ferguson and Erickson headed to By George's club, where the night seemed to turn around. The night unfolded in a haze of alcohol, and Erickson, in particular, became heavily intoxicated, mixing alcohol with cocaine and Adderall, a potent cocktail with dangerous consequences. As the night wore on, the effects of alcohol, cocaine, and Adderall coursed through Charles Erickson's body, clouding his judgment. Around 1 a.m., he and Ryan Ferguson left the bar, their cash depleted, but their desire for excitement undiminished. In a fateful decision, Ferguson suggested they rob someone for more beer money. Despite the absurdity of the plan, Erickson agreed. Armed with a tire iron from Ferguson's car, the two began prowling the streets, searching for a victim. Meanwhile, 48-year-old Kent Heiholt, a beloved sports editor at the Columbia Daily Tribune, was wrapping up his night at work. At 2:10 a.m., Kent logged off his computer and stepped into the Tribune's small parking lot. There, he struck up a brief conversation with colleague Michael Boyd before heading to his car, unaware that Ferguson and Erickson were watching him from the shadows. Despite Kent's imposing stature, standing 6'5" and weighing 300 pounds, the pair decided to attack. Erickson struck first, repeatedly hitting Kent with the tire iron until he collapsed. But the violence didn't stop there. Ferguson then took Kent's belt and strangled him, a chillingly personal method for what was supposed to be a random robbery. As the brutal assault unfolded, Shauna Ornt, a caretaker at the Tribune, stepped outside for a cigarette. In the dim light, she spotted two shadowy figures near Kent's car. Sensing something was wrong, and she quickly fetched her supervisor, Jerry Trump. Meanwhile, Ferguson rifled through Kent's pockets, stealing his watch and car keys, while Erickson retrieved the tire iron and belt before they both fled. When Jerry and Shauna arrived at the scene, Jerry saw Kent's lifeless body and shouted, "I see you there! Who's out there?" Erickson, already walking away, nonchalantly replied, "Somebody's hurt, man." The reality of the situation hit Jerry like a freight train. This wasn't just a routine night at work, it was a nightmare. Jerry recognized Kent immediately, lying face down in a pool of blood. He called out to Shauna to dial 911, while another colleague, Robert Thompson, arrived and checked for a pulse. There were none. Kent's neck bore red marks consistent with strangulation, and his lifeless body lay next to a pile of cat food he had likely set out earlier, an all too poignant reminder of his kindness even in his final moments. The police and paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was too late. The autopsy later revealed that Kent had been struck at least 11 times in the head and neck with a blunt object, but the ultimate cause of death was asphyxiation. His hyoid bone fractured during the strangulation. The attack had taken a horrifying 6 to 8 minutes, a torturous eternity for Kent's loved ones to imagine. The police faced a daunting challenge. Kent was well loved, and there seemed to be no reason for such a vicious attack. With little forensic evidence to go on, the investigation stalled. A single bloody hair strand was found in Kent's hand, but it didn't match any known profiles. Fingerprints lifted from his car and bloody footprints at the scene provided no leads. And despite the descriptions given by Shauna and Jerry, the case went cold. For Kent's family, the lack of justice was agonizing. While they grieved, Ferguson and Erickson went on with their lives as if nothing had happened. Erickson, so intoxicated that night, couldn't even remember what he'd done. After the incident, Ryan Ferguson and Charles Erickson graduated high school and went on to attend separate colleges, Erickson staying close to home in Columbia, while Ferguson moved 2 hours away to Kansas City. 2 years later, Erickson came across a news report about the unsolved murder, accompanied by a police sketch of the suspect. The sketch bore an uncanny resemblance to him. Erickson began to wonder if he had been involved, though his memory was foggy from that intoxicated night. At a New Year's Eve party in 2003, Erickson confided his fears to Ferguson, who vehemently denied any involvement, but Erickson's paranoia only grew, eventually leading him to believe they were guilty. He even claimed Ferguson had threatened to kill him if he went to the police. Consumed by guilt and fear, Erickson confessed his suspicions to a friend, Art Figura, who then shared the disturbing revelation with another friend, Nick Gilpin. Alarmed, Nick took the information to the Columbia police, who swiftly brought Erickson in for questioning. During his interrogation, Erickson gave a detailed confession about Kent Heitholt's murder, implicating Ferguson as his accomplice. Although years had passed, Ferguson's past was catching up with him. On March 10, 2004, police arrived at Ferguson's Kansas City College to arrest him for Kent's murder, a shocking turn of events for the unsuspecting student. Despite hours of intense interrogation, Ferguson maintained his innocence, insisting that he and Erickson had stayed at the By George Club until closing, then parted ways peacefully. Ferguson pleaded not guilty to charges of first-degree murder and robbery, but the case proceeded to trial. Meanwhile, Erickson was offered a plea deal, plead guilty to first-degree murder and armed criminal action, and he would receive a 25-year sentence instead of risking a life sentence. Erickson accepted the deal, and his damning testimony against Ferguson became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case when the trial commenced on October 14, 2005. On the stand, Erickson recounted the gruesome details of the crime, claiming he had struck Kent with a tire iron while Ferguson strangled him with a belt. Erickson even described how Ferguson had tightened the belt around Kent's neck by pulling back on it with his foot on Kent's back. A chilling image that left the courtroom in stunned silence. Adding to the prosecution's case, Tribune caretakers Shauna Ornt and Jerry Trump testified that they had seen two men matching the descriptions of Erickson and Ferguson at the crime scene. Jerry, who was incarcerated on unrelated charges, claimed he recognized the men after seeing their photos in a newspaper report sent to him by his wife. The defense argued that Erickson's memories were unreliable, given his intoxicated state on the night of the crime. They pointed out the absence of any forensic evidence linking Ferguson to the murder. Neither his fingerprints nor the hair found in Kent's hand matched Ferguson or Erickson. They also highlighted the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, suggesting that Shauna and Jerry could have been mistaken. Despite the defense's compelling arguments for reasonable doubt, the prosecution's case hinged on Erickson's confession, which, although potentially flawed, was a first-person account of the crime. The jury was left to grapple with the conflicting evidence, the physical evidence that didn't connect Ferguson to the crime, and Erickson's detailed account of their supposed involvement. On October 18, 2005, one day before Ryan Ferguson's 21st birthday, the jury had to make a tough choice. They found him guilty of second-degree murder and aggravated robbery. Despite being only 17 at the time of the crime, Ferguson was sentenced to 40 years in prison, a sentence that effectively ended any hopes for a normal life. his future, marriage, children, and a career was obliterated, replaced by the bleak reality of spending his prime years behind bars as a convicted felon. Kent Heidholt, the victim, was a completely innocent man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. His brutal murder left a void in the lives of those who knew and loved him. From the public's perspective, justice had finally been served after 4 long years. Erickson had confessed, and both he and Ferguson had been identified by eyewitnesses. It seemed like an open and shut case, with many believing the conviction was solid. However, throughout the investigation and trial, Ferguson steadfastly maintained his innocence. His family, unwavering in their belief in his character, stood firmly by his side. They knew their son and brother could never have committed such a heinous crime, but their belief wasn't unique. A growing number of people began to voice concerns that Ferguson's conviction was a gross miscarriage of justice. Ferguson's case eventually caught the attention of renowned Chicago attorney Kathleen Zellner, a fierce advocate for those wrongfully convicted. Zellner, who had made a name for herself by taking on high-profile cases pro bono, was driven by a relentless pursuit of justice. She took on Ferguson's case in 2009, and with his family's unwavering support, she began her investigation. Zellner's first focus was the witness testimony that had been crucial in securing Ferguson's conviction. Her findings were nothing short of shocking. When she interviewed Erickson, Jerry Trump, and Shauna Ornt, the 3 key witnesses, they all admitted to lying in court. Each one pointed to the prosecutor, Kevin Crane, as the orchestrator of their fabricated testimonies. The revelation was staggering. A young man was serving 40 years in prison based on lies, all allegedly manipulated by the very person responsible for upholding justice. During Erickson's initial police interview, it was evident that he remembered nothing about the night of Kent's murder. He even admitted, "I could be making all of this up." His confessions were driven by intrusive thoughts, persistent, unwanted ideas that plagued his mind, making him doubt his own innocence. Erickson's mental state was such that he began to believe he might have been involved in the crime, despite having no memory of it. For those unfamiliar with intrusive thoughts, they can be deeply distressing, particularly for individuals with conditions like obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. These thoughts challenge a person's sense of reality, making them question whether they could have acted on them, even though they are abhorrent to the person experiencing them. In Erickson's case, these thoughts spiraled out of control, especially under the pressure of police interrogation. When the detectives confronted Erickson, they aggressively pushed the narrative that Ferguson was indifferent to the consequences, further fueling Erickson's doubts and fears. The interrogation that Charles Erickson faced was not only intense, but also manipulative. The detectives, aware of Erickson's fragile state, fed him details about the crime, suggesting how the murder occurred, even when he couldn't recall. Erickson, confused and scared, initially guessed wrong about the weapon used to strangle Kent, mentioning a t-shirt or a bungee cord. The detectives grew increasingly frustrated, leading him to the conclusion they wanted: a belt was used. Despite this, Erickson still admitted he had no recollection of that detail, revealing the unreliability of his confession. Kathleen Zellner, determined to uncover the truth, asked Erickson about the aftermath of the crime. He recalled having no blood on his clothes or injuries the next day, inconsistent with someone involved in a violent murder. Erickson also confessed that he had been pressured and intimidated by prosecutor Kevin Crane into implicating Ferguson. In his initial interviews, Erickson was vague and unsure, yet by the time of Ferguson's trial, he could recount the events in precise detail, as if he had been coached. Fearing Ferguson would betray him, Erickson crafted a story to protect himself. He admitted to Zellner that he had been the sole perpetrator, and Ferguson had actually tried to stop him. Despite this confession, Ferguson refused to accept Erickson's revised account, maintaining that he wasn't present at the crime scene at all. Ferguson's belief in his innocence extended to Erickson, whom he saw as another victim of the circumstances rather than a betrayer. Zellner also spoke with Shauna Ornt, who revealed that she had told Crane that Ferguson was not the man she had seen in the parking lot. Crane, however, repeatedly tried to coerce her into implicating Ferguson, even resorting to threats. Crane's actions painted a disturbing picture of a prosecutor more interested in winning than in justice. The case's forensic evidence, or lack thereof, further undermined the conviction. The bloody footprints at the crime scene did not match the shoe sizes of either Erickson or Ferguson, yet this critical detail was never presented in court. Moreover, Jerry Trump's testimony was built on a false memory allegedly created when Crane showed him Ferguson's photograph in 2004, years after the crime, despite Jerry's wife having no recollection of sending him a newspaper with the suspect's photos. Trump testified that he recognized Ferguson from that article, a narrative fabricated by Crane. Zellner's investigation uncovered that the prosecution had committed Brady violations by withholding evidence from the defense, including a transcript of Jerry Trump's wife denying she sent the newspaper and evidence conflicting with Erickson's timeline. This evidence, if disclosed, could have discredited the witnesses and cast serious doubt on the prosecution's case. The bouncer at the By George Club and a customer confirmed that Ferguson and Erickson had left the club by 1:30 a.m., conflicting with Erickson's testimony that they returned to the club after the murder. This discrepancy, along with the absence of forensic evidence, pointed to a fabricated case against Ferguson. Erickson and Trump eventually recanted their testimonies, admitting they had lied under pressure. Armed with this new evidence, Zellner won a retrial for Ferguson in 2012. At the retrial, she called Michael Boyd, the last person to see Kent alive, to testify. Surprisingly, Boyd had never been called during the original trial, despite his timeline being crucial to the case against Ferguson and Erickson. Zellner's questioning revealed that Boyd's timeline placed him at the scene during the murder, raising further doubts about the original investigation. Additionally, a pathologist cast doubt on the theory that a tire iron was the murder weapon, suggesting that Kent's injuries were more consistent with a nail puller. Beatings and strangulation are not typical in robberies. They point to something much deeper, rooted in a relationship filled with animosity, rage, and disdain. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was personal. The fact that Kent Heitholt's wallet wasn't taken further undermined the robbery motive. Combined with the false testimonies and the prosecution's repeated instances of non-disclosure, the case against Ryan Ferguson was falling apart. The Court of Appeals recognized this miscarriage of justice. In November 2013, they vacated Ferguson's conviction and dismissed all charges, acknowledging the overwhelming evidence of his innocence. On November 12, 2013, Ferguson, expecting a routine visit from his attorney and family, was instead greeted by Kathleen Zellner, holding a court booklet with 3 powerful words: "It is over." After 10 years of wrongful imprisonment in a maximum security prison, Ferguson was finally released. While his time in prison may have been less harsh due to fellow inmates' belief in his innocence, it was still a decade stolen from him. Upon his release, Ferguson filed a civil suit against former prosecutor Kevin Crane, 11 police officers, and the state of Missouri, alleging false arrest, fabrication of evidence, and malicious prosecution. In 2017, he was awarded $11 million in damages, $1 million for each year of his stolen freedom. In the face of this gross injustice, Ferguson had not just survived, but thrived. His family, unwavering in their support, had been his pillar of strength. His father, Bill, had once told him, "You have to do everything you can to survive," urging him to become stronger, faster, and smarter. Ferguson took that advice to heart, dedicating himself to fitness and emerging from prison as a qualified personal trainer with a physique that symbolized his resilience. In 2022, Ferguson appeared as a contestant on season 33 of The Amazing Race, alongside his old friend Dusty Harris. They finished third, a testament to Ferguson's strength and determination to reclaim his life. Ferguson's story is one of triumph over adversity and a relentless pursuit of justice. But as Ferguson rebuilt his life, the shadow of Kevin Crane's corruption lingered. Crane, a man driven by ego rather than justice, had manipulated the system to secure a wrongful conviction. His actions not only stole a decade of Ferguson's life, but also ensured that Kent Heitholt's real killer would likely never be brought to justice. Crane's willingness to hide evidence, coerce witnesses, and fabricate a case exemplified a deep corruption within the justice system. Despite his own ordeal, Ferguson actively campaigned for Charles Erickson's release, believing in his innocence. Erickson's appeal in 2018 was denied, with the court citing his initial confession as proof of guilt despite the clear evidence of coercion and manipulation. Erickson was finally released in January 2023 after serving 18 years of a 25-year sentence. But the injustice of his imprisonment remains a dark stain on the system. The Heitholt family, meanwhile, continues to suffer. More than 2 decades after Kent's murder, the case remains unsolved. Kent's wife, Deborah, and their 2 teenage children, Vincent and Carly Rose, are left with the bitter reality that the person who took their loved one's life walks free. The police and prosecutors' mishandling of the case has made it unlikely that Kent's killer will ever be brought to justice. Ryan Ferguson, now 38, has dedicated his life to raising awareness about his experience with the justice system. Reflecting on his time in prison, he said, "It really hurts to think about that. You try to avoid it, but it's impossible. I missed out on all my 20s, and there's just no getting away from that." His story, though harrowing, serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of truth and justice. Ferguson is not alone. His case is believed to be one of thousands where individuals have been wrongfully convicted and are serving sentences for crimes they didn't commit. Characters like Kevin Crane, who prioritize ego and winning over justice, are a dangerous cancer within the system, leading to devastating consequences for innocent lives. Thanks for watching. If you love uncovering mysteries, hit like and subscribe to Secret Sleuths. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next investigation.